Hey guys, welcome back to my channel Sociology with Mahima. Today we are going to understand Evans Pritchard explanation of social structure. Radcliffe Brown's famous 1940 paper on social structure discusses Evans Pritchard ideas of social structure. Although Radcliffe Brown did not reject Evans' definition, he felt that his concept was too narrow. Pritchard had explained social structure mainly as relations between groups, and he presented this idea only in the final section of the last chapter of his book, The Nuer. Radcliffe Brown, however, believed that social structure should include a wider range of social relationships and institutions than what Evans Pritchard had described. Pritchard conducted intensive fieldwork among the Nuer people of Sudan. In his first major study on them, he tried to describe Nuer society at a more abstract and theoretical level, which was uncommon at the time because a proper theory of social structure was still missing in anthropology. While working with the Nuer, he searched for such a theoretical framework. Although this early work laid the foundation, many of the ideas for which he later became influential in sociology and social anthropology developed after this study. In his book, The Nuer, Pritchard begins by explaining how deeply cattle are integrated into Nuer life. They influence almost every social, economic, and cultural aspect of their society. The ecological conditions in which the Nuer live determine where they settle and how they move seasonally. Their ideas of time and space are also shaped by their cattle-based lifestyle. He then discusses how the Nuer are organized politically. They have no centralized authority, no king, chief, or formal government, making them a classical example of a stateless or SFLS society. Instead, their political system is based on territorial segments, which come together or oppose each other depending on the situation. This gave rise to the idea of a segmentary political system, where social order is maintained through a balance of competing and cooperating segments. Pritchard spent years living among the Nuer people. He didn't start his analysis from individuals or persons. Instead, he asked how do different parts of Nuer society relate to each other as groups. So, he studied Nuer clans, lineages, villages, age sets, tribal segments, political groups. His method was understand the big picture through group relations, not individual roles. Unlike Radcliffe Brown, who believed that the basic unit of social structure is the individual person who occupies positions and roles. According to Pritchard, social structure is the pattern of relationships between groups that remain stable, consistent, and enduring over time. He shows us that even a society without centralized government can still have a very strong and organized social structure. This structure is based on how groups cooperate, oppose, balance each other, and maintain order. So, social structure for him is essentially the framework of group relations that keep society functioning. Pritchard argues that social structure is formed by groups, not by individual people, because individuals are temporary. They are born, they grow up, they die, and they change their roles in society. But groups last for a very long time. They continue even when individuals change. So, according to him, the real building blocks of society are groups because they stay stable across generations. He explained that social structure is basically an organized arrangement of groups that continue over time and whose relationships remain mostly constant. This means even if people inside the group change, the relationship between the groups remains steady. So what are these groups in Nuer society? He identifies certain groups that form the core of Nuer social structure. Territorial groups, which are basically people living in the same region or village. Lineages. These are groups based on common ancestry or descent. Age sets, which are groups of people who belong to the same age category and move through life stages together. These groups stay intact for generations and they organized everyday life, politics, marriage, rules, and social order among the Nuer. He uses the term social structure in a way that is very similar to how Radcliffe Brown uses the term structural form. Both scholars believe believe that social structure is long-lasting, stable patterns of relationships that continue even when individuals' members change. So even though they use slightly different language, their focus is the same. That is, not the temporary individual, but the enduring pattern of relations between groups. Pritchard, in his analysis of the Nuer society, does not treat the family as a structural group. For him, a structural group is a group that meets two conditions. First, it must be permanent or long-lasting. That is, it should continue even when individuals are born or die. Second, its relationships should remain consistent, which means the group should maintain stable relations with other groups over generations. He says that the family does not have permanence, and therefore it cannot be treated as a structural group. Families do not last long. A family may exist only until parents die or children grow up and form their own families. Families keep dissolving and reforming. As members die or move out, one family disappears and another new family is created. No long-term continuity. Unlike a lineage or a clan, the family does not remain the same across generations. So, according to him, the family does not meet the criteria of stability and endurance. That's why it cannot be considered a structural group. But even though the family is not a structural group, Evans says it plays a central role in maintaining the entire social structure because families create new members. Children are born into families which ensure that society continues. Families socialize individuals. They teach children social rules, norms, values, and group identities. This means families reproduce the society by producing and training its future members. So even if a family is not an enduring group, it helps sustain the enduring groups. Pritchard says that groups like lineages, territorial groups, and age sets form the core of social structure because they are highly permanent. But at the same time, he also makes a crucial clarification. These groups are permanent, but they are not static. He agrees that certain groups last for many generations. They do not disappear even when individual members die. This is why they are called structural groups. They give society its long-term backbone. But he also clarifies that these groups may change over time. But despite these changes, the general pattern of their relationship stays the same. So, they may form changes, but the structure remains recognizable. He says that even if the details change, the basic framework of society stays intact. This is called structural continuity. Pritchard says that Nuer society is not a random collection of villages sitting next to each other. Instead, Nuer society is highly organized and interconnected. He explains that every local group in Nuer society is segmented, which means each group is divided into smaller units or segments. He also observed something very important. These segments do not remain separate all the time. Depending on the situation, they may unite, cooperate, form alliances, or support each other. This unity is called fusion. So, the society functions like a flexible system. Segments separate and then unite when required. He argues that any group cannot be studied in isolation because every group's meaning, behavior, and role depend on its relationships with other groups, its position in the larger structure, how it unites or separates from other segments. So, he concludes, society should be understood as a system of enduring groups. These groups include lineages, territorial groups, and age sets. These are long-lasting, much more permanent than individual people. Now comes his main point, which is social structure is not about individuals. It is about the relations between these enduring groups. He compares it to other systems. Kinship relations form a kinship system. Political relations form a political system. And group relations form the social structure. This helps us understand that the entire Nuer society is held together not by individual actions but by stable pattern relationships between groups. According to Pritchard, a group is not just a random collection of people. A real group exists only when people see themselves as a single distinct unit. That means they share a common identity. Outsiders also recognize them as a group. So it's not only self-perception. Even other groups can look at them and say, Yes, those people form a group. They have mutual or reciprocal obligations toward each other. In simple terms, they support each other, especially in times of need. To him, being a group is not just about sharing a name or belonging to the same land. It becomes a real group only when the members stand together during conflicts, help each other in collective problems, and act together with unity. This collective responsibility is what gives a group its strength and stability. For example, among the newer vengeance groups are formed when someone is killed. All members of the victim's group unite against the killer's group. This creates two opposed but structurally equivalent groups. He identifies certain types of group in Nuer society that show clear identity, stable boundaries, collective action, and continuity over time. These include territorial sections, lineages, and age sets. Besides this, some categories of people do not qualify as groups in his theory, even though they may seem connected. For example, a man's kindred. These relationships are too spread out and loosely defined. Neighboring tribes. They don't share a common identity or obligations. Strangers, obviously no shared identity or duty. These groups lack clear boundaries, strong identity, collective actions, and reciprocal obligations. Therefore, Pritchard does not consider them real groups in terms of structural analysis. To sum up, for Evans Pritchard, social structure is made up of groups. Groups that remain stable across generations. These enduring groups form the real components whose relations an anthropologist must study. However, he argues that social structure is not something you can directly observe with your senses. Instead, you first observe social relations among individuals, then understand how these relations form and maintain groups. When you describe how these groups relate to each other, you are constructing an understanding of social structure. Thus, social structure is an abstraction, a conceptual model created by the anthropologist based on observed social life, not something physically visible. Lastly, unlike Radcliffe Brown, who treats social anthropology as a natural science, Evans Pritchard sees it as a closer to history, a kind of historiography. He studies events, relations, and meanings rather than universal laws, making it more interpretative and narrative than scientific. That's it for today's video. I hope you like the content. If you want PDFs related to sociology, please visit my Telegram channel. You can find its link in the description. Please like, share, and subscribe. Your support means so much to me. Thank you.